So we decided to go to the capital. It's where they had the big
Yeah, it's Bhopal.
Bhopal. Yeah,
Yeah.
we went to the capital, and I went to see the uh, Department of Agriculture,
Yeah.
and I said I saw these plants growing in this town, right outside this town, and he said, "Oh, there's no ganja growing there." And I said, "No, there were fields there," and he said, "Wait, I'll get on a phone," and he got on a phone, and he was quite surprised. He said, "Yes, there is. Would you like to go see it?" And so we were put on a first class train.
Nice. Hey everyone, welcome to the Ganja Show. Today we have with us Ed Rosenthal. He is the Ganja Guru. Thank you so much, Ed, for coming on the show. He's an author, an activist, an educator, and a long time, you could say, legacy consumer way before even I was born. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Ed.
It's my pleasure being here.
Yeah, let's begin. So you are the Ganja Guru. What makes you the Ganja Guru? I've read history about like your books, your activism, but let's share that with the audience.
I was with High Times uh, for about 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
and so during that time, they termed me the Ganja Guru, and so
That's amazing. Yeah,
that's how I got it.
I've seen a couple of your interviews where people are talking about how to grow and whether LED lights are the best or no. But my first question would be, do you have a favorite strain that you love?
More than one,
Yeah.
because you use different varieties of cannabis at different times.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're doing work or reading or something like that, you might use a different strain than if you're relaxing.
Yeah.
So there's no one particular strain, but I generally like sativas a lot.
Mm-hmm. I was just recently in a podcast with a master grower, and we were just discussing on the point that there's not a lot of like pure indica sativa left anymore because there's a lot of hybrids, a lot of inbreeding. What are your thoughts on that?
That's true, but people don't want. The market uh, responds to what people like,
Mm-hmm.
and people actually like hybrids more than they like the pure strains.
Yeah.
But they are available, and there are uh, there are companies that specialize in those strains, and just a little research on Google or other search medium, and you'll find those companies.
So when you talk about indica sativa, like how do you classify them?
Well, in terms of usage,
Mm-hmm.
it's more in what terpenes they contain, and I think um, that the sativas contain more B-caryophyllene
Mm-hmm.
generally,
Yeah.
and then there are other. You could define them by terpenes.
Yeah.
Now, some people define them by their morphology. That the indicas generally are squat. They have some branching, and they're dark colored, and they ripen early,
Yeah.
and that's as a result of where they evolved, which was the Himalayan foothills, and they have a shorter season, so they have to ripen quickly. And sativas generally come from areas that have uh, that have a long summer or
Mm-hmm.
don't have a winter, and that would be equatorial areas, southern India. I was in Madhya Pradesh
Mm-hmm.
about when it was still legal,
Oh.
and so they had fields there, and that they were sativas.
Oh, I'm actually from Madhya Pradesh. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but I have never seen it. But you talking about like 80s or something like that, or 70s? I think at that time it was legal. Yeah,
It became illegal in 1986.
yeah. So something
it
on that.
was
Yeah.
about 81. Actually, I was there during harvest, and all these uh, people, these officers from the excise department and the tax department were there, and it was quite a
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy to. I wasn't even born at that time, but I was just talking to Madam Cannoli, who's Frenchy Cannoli's wife. She was just talking about the same thing while she was in India. She saw all of this. I have never seen a plant in Madhya Pradesh. Obviously, I've not gone there, but I guess before it was prohibition, they were growing out in the open.
Well, I'm trying to think of the name of the town,
Yeah.
and my girlfriend and I were traveling on a train, and I forget where we were going to. We looked out the window and we saw these fields,
Yeah.
and so we decided to go to the capital. It's where they had the big
Yeah, it's Bhopal.
Bhopal. Yeah,
Yeah.
we went to the capital, and I went to see the Department of Agriculture.
Yeah.
And I said, I saw these plants growing in this town, right outside this town. And he said, oh, there's no ganja growing there. And he said, I said, no, there were fields there. And he said, wait, I'll get on a phone. And he got on a phone, and he was quite surprised. He said, yes, there is. Would you like to go see it? And so we were put on a first-class train
Nice.
to the area,
Yeah.
and stayed at the Circuit House. I don't know if they still have them. Well, they, in these remote towns,
Yeah.
they have they need place for traveling officials to stay,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that's called the Circuit.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
called the Circuit
Now it's
House.
called like guest houses, like they're government-owned
Yeah,
properties. Like,
right.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
we stayed there, and we went to see the fields. I have photos of it. I've done articles about it.
Nice.
And yeah, it was a shame that they went from legalization to making it illegal and making it illegal. But
Yeah.
what I noticed there was that it was a class thing also,
Mhm.
because I was traveling on first class train, and I saw there was this family on the train, and they were traveling to Udaipur,
Mhm.
for a marriage.
Yeah.
And I had a Polaroid camera, and this was, before the idea of computers didn't exist in
yeah.
the West, or not like what we have now.
Yeah.
So I took a picture, and in 45 seconds a Polaroid develops, and they said, you have to come to the wedding. So we changed our plans again, and we went to the wedding. And I was with these hanging out with the men at the wedding, and they were passing around bottles of whiskey, but there was no thought of cannabis.
Yeah.
And when I mentioned that, they thought it was really low class. It hadn't hit the students yet,
Yeah.
or the young people.
Yeah.
And they just thought it was like, that's what working people use to ease their
Pain or like
pain.
appetite. Yeah.
That was their idea.
Yeah.
And
I think now that makes more sense, because that's why there's not a lot of mention on cannabis
Yeah.
apart from Ayurveda and the medicine. But yeah, in the mountains, that's all like working class people. They hand rub their own hash and smoke it, like to go up and down the mountain. That's a heavy task. So now it makes so much sense that there's not much mention of it. Did you try the cannabis that you saw there, or no?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I harvested it from the field.
Nice.
And the way that they harvested it was, they cut it down, and it was brought in by oxen or water buffalo
Yeah.
on carts, and there was a army officer on top of it with like a rifle or something, and so then it was laid out in the sun, and it baked all day in the sun,
Mm-hmm.
and then people came, and they put all the buds in the basket, but the leaves desiccated from the sun,
Yeah.
so they'd leave the leaves, and then they did it a second day and a third day until it became very hard, because they weren't that tight, but
Yeah.
it became very tight, and all of the glands were off of the outside, but they were locked in on the inside because the bud was tight. And so, given the roads and the conditions of movement and the heat and everything, sensimilla would just disintegrate. A lot of scents would just disintegrate. But this locked everything in. And
so as soon as you opened up the bud, you could smell on the terpenes and everything. Yeah.
But it wasn't as strong as when it started out. Now my girlfriend and I, we picked buds.
Yeah.
They said, we're leaving the field, and you're not supposed to pick any buds.
Yeah.
That's what they said. But we're leaving you here. For, so.
That meant you could pick the buds. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we picked we picked some buds, and we just let them dry on the dresser in or a chest in the room, so they didn't get that desiccation. And then we managed.
Yeah.
So we had some of the best ganja in the area because we had because it didn't go through that drying process. And then in the morning, it was around 8 a.m. and there's a rap at the door, and the door opens, and in comes an an excise officer.
Yeah.
To give us buds.
That's now it's the opposite now. Now it's become so strict that you can't even have anything on you. Yeah.
Well, I traveled through India just a couple of years ago, and the only place, people wouldn't approach older people like my wife and I as much as maybe a young person. Right? They'd say, oh,
they won't, yeah.
But we were never approached except in Delhi.
Yeah.
And what happened was this guy was selling this little trinket thing. It was a thing made out of straw, some woven thing, and you opened up, it was like a cup, and you opened it up, and out sprang a little mechanical snake.
Yeah.
So I said, but there's nothing to put this. We have nothing to put in it.
Yeah.
And he immediately knew what I meant. And he said, you wait here. He came back about 15 minutes with this big ball of hash. And he said, and that was the only place that. Yeah. We had our own.
Yeah.
We brought our own.
Oh, from the U.S.?
Yeah.
Oh.
But not. We brought it as cosmetics, like oils and things like that.
Yeah.
So we were okay.
Yeah.
But we and in Nepal the same thing. Now in Nepal it was a hash culture, a grass culture, it permeated the entire country, wherever you went.
Yeah.
But 30 years ago, and this time when we went back, like young people, it was a bar scene. It was everybody was drinking. They didn't know about the history of hash.
Yeah.
Or of grass in Nepal. They didn't know it, and it was only when we went, out into the countryside. And then we met a few people, but it was very furtive. It's a big,
taboo, yeah.
Yeah, not just taboo. It's serious criminal penalties. So we bought some, and so this young person took us. He said, "Well, I have somebody who will sell it to you." And it was his grandfather or great-grandfather who was incontinent, I think. He smelled, and I mean, because he was incontinent, So that's who sold me the hash, because the cops aren't going to take him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody's looking to catch an old man for dealing. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So And that's a sad scene, that it went from this culture that celebrated Shiva and Ganja to be, and then we went and we were visiting some monks, and the monks were. I know that they had it, but they were so scared to
show it to
or anything like that.
Yeah, makes sense. I think I don't understand why it became such a taboo or a criminal thing now, but maybe just because it was more of a working class thing and people used it for their own personal use and used to share it only with like close family and not as like robust, you could say, legacy culture that you had in the North America where like people are dealing so openly. What do you think is a way for us to basically get back to that culture now?
Well, I don't particularly like the politics that's going on in India right now.
Yeah.
The Hindu nationalism.
Yeah.
But Ganja is part of the Hindu culture.
Yeah.
So if Modi wanted to be true to the Hindu culture, he would say alcohol's forbidden, pot's legal.
Yeah.
Right?
Honestly, yeah. I mean, bhang is legal to a certain extent, but the biomass that you get to make bhang is just so bad that you can't make anything from it. Like, obviously, you need to have a good plant to be able to then make good extract or whatever, right?
We did go to one shop. There was one place, there was a shop that sold, was selling bong balls. And we said, come on, you have other stuff.
Yeah.
And no. He said, don't you have to go to the toilet? Come on in and go to the toilet.
Yeah.
And then he sold us. When he realized, like, we had no intention of turning this person in, And then he allowed us to photograph it and everything. He said, "You're
was
not
it
in
hash
India."
or?
No, it was. He was selling flour.
Yeah.
And he was selling flour, and he was selling bong balls, and maybe a little bit of sifted hash.
Yeah,
I forget
that's practically unheard of now, but. Yeah, I've seen, like, I've gone to a bhang factory, and then if you go there, it's a mess. Like, when I went there, I was wearing like a white t-shirt. When I came out, it was all green because there's no quality control. There's nothing. It's just like they're making something out of basically nothing that they get. I've seen it's just stick stems and like leaves. So maybe they need more input, but I definitely am going to make a clip out of this and send it to my family.
somebody's. Yes, they make it out of the trim and the leaf.
Yeah.
But then there's the bud. Where does the bud go?
Where does the bud go? Yeah. That's the question.
Yeah.
I've honestly never seen a bud like until I came to Canada. I've been to like the northern India where you get hash, but I never saw the plant. But if I gone up north more, I could have seen it. But where I am, like Madhya Pradesh, anywhere else, like in Bombay, you can't find a bud. It's either leaves or like it's a very dried up cannabis that you get because it's just, I guess, impossible to find good bud there.
Well, sometimes they're just harvesting early. They're not, because. So when I went to see the harvest, it was late December.
Yeah.
And then I sent a package back from a post office December 31st with some seeds in it from that harvest.
Yeah.
And that's when they were harvesting, in late December. So those are really, in this part, in Madhya Pradesh, it was, that's a part of India where it would be, stayed hot. It was extremely hot even in,
December.
in December.
Yeah.
So, so those were really late sativa plants. So where you would get it. I think they've quote cleaned it up, unquote.
Yeah.
But Goa was a big center, also.
Yeah.
Because there were so many foreigners there. I think that is not. I think that they've either chased the foreigners or a lot of them have left.
A lot, yeah.
Yeah.
Now Goa is no more like it
They
was a
don't want.
Portuguese hub, so now it's basically more touristy than anything else.
I
Yeah,
think they're trying to do upscale.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, get rid of those hippies.
yeah. That's what they wanted to do. So they cleaned up in 80s and 90s, and now Goa is more of like a tourist destination rather than like a hippie place.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. Yeah, it's a when just talking about like cannabis horticulture, like you teach classes, you've written books on it. Do you think that maybe you can go grow those land races here and have the same impact, or like is it good enough weed for like the US?
Well, I would say that people in, you know, I don't care whether it's the U.S., but any place where, you know, there's home cultivation, you know, let's say from the new generation starting in the 60s,
Yeah.
you know, the new group of people, well, there's been thousands, tens of thousands of breeders. You know, it's probably the most classically bred plant in the world because, you know, everybody wants to be a breeder, you know,
Yeah.
right? You grow a couple of times and then you say, well, I'm going to cross this times this. I'm going to, right? You've heard that. So there's this, if you think of that as a single breeding program, even though some of the people might be isolated, so if it's really good, it's going to get into the general population probably. So with that, I would say it's improved cannabis so much. But I want to mention something else, which is I've met a number of collectors, maybe 4 or 5, and, you know, a person can cover a lot of ground, but who just go after land races. There's one who I'm working with from land race seeds, and he travels through India, through the different areas of India, and most of them do have land races because it hasn't been touched by tourists.
Yeah.
You know, tourists will go to Bombay or Delhi or something, but they don't go into the interior.
Remote areas,
They don't go to Bhopal, one of the most beautiful city, right? It's like a little beacon.
Yeah.
In
the center of India. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, but people don't go to places like that. So the land races are still there, and there hasn't been much intercourse between Western growers and in the interior of India.
Yeah.
So this fellow from Landrace Seed Company, he travels throughout India and brings and gathers seed and sells it worldwide. Now, if you look at Jamaica, you know, there were two aside from the white colonists, colonial powers, in this case England, in Jamaica.
Yeah.
So aside from them, there were two non-indigenous populations that were brought to India. One was enslaved blacks,
Yeah.
and, you know, to work the sugar fields and things like that. And the other, Indians who were indentured, which means that they came over and they had to work for free for a certain period of time, and then they were free to do whatever they want. And that's why so many of the small businesses in Jamaica, and large businesses too, whose ancestors came from India.
Yeah.
And you see that a lot. Less now because a lot of them re-immigrated out of Jamaica. But if you were enslaved, you didn't pack your bags and take whatever you want, the few items that you are allowed, you know. Well, you're allowed one knapsack, you know. But if you were indentured, that's different. It was a voluntary move.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't pick you up and say you were an indentured. It was voluntary.
Yeah.
So you could pack your bags. So the result of that is that the cannabis in Jamaica came from Indian plants, and you can see it in the terms in Jamaica for cannabis.
Yeah.
Ganja, Kali weed, which means killer weed, right? Kali being the goddess
Yeah.
of death and destruction. So, uh, so, so all of those terms show that there was a connection between the Indian. So this fellow, getting back to this fellow Fritz, so he's been now. For the Jamaican in Jamaica is no longer. You can't get pure Jamaican because whether or not the growers themselves try to, even if the growers themselves try to keep it pure, the pollen in the air that was from the material brought by people coming to Jamaica from the U.S. and from Europe brought all those new seeds. So there's no pure Jamaican weed anymore.
Okay.
Except in with collectors.
Yeah.
But this, as I said, this fellow Fritz is selling these from Landrace is selling these seeds.
Yeah.
And that is where the Jamaican was derived from. So that's so now. I've been playing around with that and trying to develop some Jamaican flavors.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's all because of the environment that they're grown in, which changes a lot more. When I was just started reading more about cannabis, I realized like a modern strain right now has like lineage going back to like an Afghan landrace or an Indian landrace so much that everything just came from there anyway. So some part of it is already there through generations. But like you said, there's still some parts where it's untouched by people, and especially like any foreigners going there, they don't have any of these new strains. Yeah. I was hoping to chat more about like future of cannabis, but thank you so much for talking about the past. It was so good. I had no idea that you had so much experience with India itself.